While in the 1990s, a commission investigating apartheid-era crimes recommended 300 people needed to be prosecuted.
There are people who were not granted amnesty by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but the National Prosecuting Authority has failed to act. Its former head, Vusi Gigaba, now tells eNCA he was ordered by President Thabo Mbeki's ministers to sweep the cases under the carpet. eNCA contributor Mpho Lakaje brings us this special feature on the TRC.
In the 1970s, freedom fighter Dodo SI Kosana died, allegedly in a shootout with the police. It all happened in eastern Transvaal, an area today known as Mpumalanga. But his body was never found, and no one came forward to claim responsibility for his death.
I never met him. He left South Africa when I was a year old. So I think I have no recollection of him personally, but then the recollection that I have, it's all the stories that the aunts and his siblings told me what type of a person he was. He was a revolutionary. He was a fighter. He was a man of conviction. He believed in the armed struggle. He believed in making sure that South Africa comes back to the people that it belongs to them.
We are charged to unearth the truth about our dark past, to lay the ghost of that past so that they will not return to haunt us.
It was incidents like Dodo SI Kosana's that formed the basis for the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1995. Its mandate was to promote dialogue between victims and perpetrators of political violence. But beyond this, it needed to investigate gross human rights violations that occurred from the 1960s to 1994. Victims were given a chance to tell their stories and perpetrators an opportunity to apply for amnesty.
There was also a hope that once that is done, some people would be forgiven if they made a truthful and complete disclosure about what crimes they've committed. And others who applied for amnesty and through disclosures, if, for instance, their disclosures were faulty in some ways and dishonest in other ways, they would not be granted amnesty but could be recommended for prosecution.
When the TRC completed its work in the late 90s, it handed a list with 300 unresolved cases to the National Prosecuting Authority. But in the past 24 years, only a handful of these cases have been pursued. A lack of sufficient evidence was often cited. Former Director of Public Prosecutions Vusi Gigaba, however, told eNCA of blatant political interference.
President Mbeki never told me not to prosecute. There were ministers in his cabinet who were unhappy with my decision to go ahead and prosecute, because I felt that it was my responsibility as the National Director of Public Prosecutions to prosecute people who had to be prosecuted in terms of the law. So it's his ministers, including the former Minister of Justice, Ms. Bridget Mabandla at the time, who actually even wrote to me to say I must stop, these issues, and I refused to stop.
And here I will mention Bulalani.
Unfortunately, my term was cut short, I was suspended and subsequently fired.
Is the chairperson
Despite numerous requests by eNCA to respond to these allegations, Mabandla has declined to comment.
Thank you.
Now, I had worked very closely with many government officials, and it was an acute betrayal for me, because that means from the time I was talking to them in 2003 up to 2017, nobody was telling me the truth, that they weren't investigating these cases. And so it was a huge blow, because you're talking about your comrades who are actually deliberately suppressing the truth. And I think a question for me is, why did that happen? And why did it happen under the democratic regime?
These people, all of them, had a problem, which they still have till today. Because among the leaders, a lot of them were double agents. Some of them were in the ANC, but also on the payroll of the state. So a lot of the actions that took place against specific people, you could have been killed in the ANC as an ANC activist, but actually some of the people that caused you to be killed are in the cabinet today.
But the National Prosecuting Authority now promises to do better and has launched a renewed effort to resolve TRC cases.
So the model that we have put in place is that the prosecutors and investigators are working jointly on the case, which you never had before. And that was problems with the first phase, the early years that I spoke about. We didn't actually have that police investigative capacity. So in other words, the cases just had to go to ordinary general police to investigate, and that was part of the problem. This kind of work requires specialization. It requires dedication and commitment. So with those measures, we're quite confident that the work will move much faster now, and we'll get to a closure point.
Don't worry about it.
But time is ticking. Both the victims and perpetrators aren't getting any younger. Evidence may no longer be available. Hopes to resolve these cases are fading fast unless the NPA acts swiftly. Mpho Lakaje, Johannesburg.